KZAE, Cultura 1060 AM.
1060 AM, WNOE is the exclusive New Orleans home for the Larry King Show.
This is BBC Radio 1, 990 AM, 89.3 FM in Winnipeg.
OOL-FM HD1, Phoenix.
Here in Cayman, there's so much pride in the roots, heritage, and history of our island.
Giving Jamaica a better music mix. This is Power 106.
Well, the radio station WNG 601. Broadcasting on a frequency of 162.425 megahertz from Rio Grande City.
We got him! We got him, baby!
That the police were looking and following some...
Yeah!
You survived the static.
You pushed through the noise floor.
Now it's time to hear what's on the other side.
Welcome to the ultimate celebration of the chase.
Broadcasting from North Shore Studios in Mandeville, Louisiana.
This is the From the Static podcast from DX Central.
We take you now to Studio A and your host, Lloyd Van Horn.
Greetings and welcome to another edition of the From the Static podcast. I'm your host, Lloyd Van Horn, here in Studio A in the North Shore Studios in Mandeville, Louisiana, where it is Sporadic Es season. Happy E-Skip season to all of us here in the Northern Hemisphere that celebrate and like to browse the VHF portion of the spectrum for Sporadic E. No matter where you might find us, though, hopefully you're ready to dive into a little bit of some data and kind of nerd out a bit on the data here about Sporadic E, because that's our goal for today for episode 31, is to dive into some data here for Sporadic E data for the Northern Hemisphere, starting with a look at 2026 so far, May specifically, and a little bit of the first week of June, because I'm recording this on June 5th, so it's the first week of June has pretty much gone through. We have a couple days left, but looking back at May and then trying to assess from the historical context with our historical data that we have access to, how does that stack up and what does the data tell us? What's the story telling us so far? All of this that we're looking at here is part of our Sporadic E data analysis project, CDAP, which you can find all the data here for 2017 through 2025 at fmdxdata.com. We don't have the 2026 data up yet because I have some things I need to do to get that ready. I might try to put May up here pretty soon, but honestly, data's still coming in, so it's all very preliminary anyway. And so what this data is that we're looking at, just as a recap for those who might not be familiar, we take data of loggings submitted by DXers to fmlist.org, and we're filtering down to just Sporadic E logs and just for DXers from North America. And we crunch the numbers, we look at the data, and we have a full data set dating back to 2017, the 2017 season, through the end of last year. So we have that as our historical record through August of last year. And then we are collecting in real time, in the current season, the data, and we're crunching those numbers, and we're just trying to kind of get a sense of where we stack up with previous years in mind. Are we on a positive trend? Are we on a not so positive trend? What story is the season starting to kind of bear out and tell us? And so that's what's really our project goal is here with CDAP at DX Central, is to try to make sense of the data. So we're going to be diving into all of that here. We're going to be doing a deep dive first into some historical data, looking back at Mays of years past. Then we're going to look into May of 2026 and say, okay, what's the story? What do we see? And then we're going to do a quasi look ahead. And I'm going to put a big old disclaimer on that one, because the look ahead is really kind of a look at right now more than anything. It's as I mentioned, it's June 5th as I record this. So the first week of June, how is that stacked up? And what does that typically mean for us? Again, I do want to preface that all of the data here that we're going to take a look at and dive into is preliminary data. Logs are still pouring in. DXers are still submitting their logs from IQ recordings and whatnot from their SDRs. So this is all preliminary data. The numbers are continuing to evolve, especially the more recent stuff. But some of the bigger days that we're going to talk about in here, those are definitely still evolving. Like, I'm still going through my logs for a handful of dates for May, and then June is waiting patiently for me to get to those as well. So the numbers are going to change, but I think when we say change, we mean it's only going to go up from here. Okay, the numbers are only really going to go up from here. So, in some cases, so keep that in mind as we kind of dive in. First, let's do a quick executive summary, quick TLDR on the month of May of 2026. So, it started out sluggish. It was a sluggish start to the season, as you typically kind of see with the month of May. You don't expect fireworks in the month of May, but it did. It started out sluggish, but what separated this May, I think, from other years, and going to be kind of the theme as we dive into that later on here in the podcast, is that May had an explosiveness to it that we don't typically see from the month of May. There was a period of high activity. Now, it was very isolated, down to just a handful of days. And then everything around that was kind of but it was a little more in line with what you'd expect for the month of May. But there was an explosiveness component to a handful of days in the month of May that really pushed the data into a higher log total and DXer count and things like that than we typically see in the month of May. So as we're looking at the historical numbers, and then when we're doing our comparison for May, and we're looking at the fact that we had 3,469 logs and counting for the month of May of 2026, which is by far and away the highest log count that we have on record in our data set since 2017 for the month of May. When we see that we had 65 unique DXers, which is second only to last year as far as the number of DXers experiencing the openings and reporting logging data. Last year we had 66. This year we had 65. When we see the logs per DXer at 53 for the month of May, which is pretty high. It's higher than any other year we've seen, right? When we see things like that, we have to take that in the context of what it really meant and what the rest of the month presented to us, and then what was the flow of that, and what do we usually see in a month of May? What do we usually expect to see for a flow? And then as we get, again, later into the episode here, we're also going to talk about so far in June, this first week of June, what have we seen and what does that tell us? Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the historical data. We're going to look back at years gone by for the month of May and see, what does the data tell us? What does the story typically look like in the month of May in the Sporadic Es season here in the Northern Hemisphere? Don't go anywhere, my friends. The From the Static podcast. We'll be right back.
From the Static is made possible by listeners just like you. If you love tracking the bands and sharing the thrill of the chase, consider joining the crew in Studio C on Patreon. Your support is what keeps the dial spinning and the content coming. As a thank you, our patrons get exclusive perks, including early access to every single podcast episode, a full week of early access to all DX Central YouTube videos, exclusive patron-only live streams, and the first look at upcoming challenges and contests. Help us keep the static alive. Become a member today at patreon.com/DXCentral. That's patreon.com/DXCentral.
Ever wonder what the bands sound like down on the Gulf Coast? You don't have to wonder anymore. Head over to livedxing.com and spin the dials right from our North Shore studios. For AM, shortwave, and ham radio enthusiasts, we have a dedicated lineup of Kiwi SDRs ready to pull in weak signals. If you're an FM DXer, dive into our suite of 5 high-performance FM web servers, each paired with a top-tier antenna built specifically to catch legendary Gulf tropo openings, and hopefully some sporadic E. Plus, our VHF and tracking setups let you monitor local air traffic from MSY, pull in NOAA weather radio, and decode live APRS, ADSB, and marine AIS data right on the map. If you want to explore further, we've got links to global receiver directories to take your DXing worldwide. Experience the airwaves from our neck of the woods. For the DXer or radio enthusiast who wants to hear it all, visit livedxing.com today.
The summer heat is officially here, and that means the dials are catching fire. The third annual DX Central Summer of DX Challenge is underway right now. This year, we've turned up the temperature. For the first time ever, we've added NOAA weather radio to the lineup. Get ready to hunt down those elusive, low-power weather radio stations via Tropo, Meteor Scatter, or major Sporadic E openings. We've completely overhauled the medium wave and FM interfaces with a brand new log entry process featuring full bulk import options to save you time. And the hunt goes deeper than ever. Alongside our classic grid square chase, we've added a brand new county chase and targeted bounty hunts to push your gear to the limit. Are you ready to claim your spot on the leaderboard? Head to summerofdx.com and log your catches today.
Summer of DX.
You're listening to the From the Static podcast from DX Central. Let's take you back to the North Shore Studios and your host, Lloyd Van Horn.
It's the From the Static podcast from DX Central. I am your host, Lloyd Van Horn, and we are talking Sporadic E. And we're getting to a segment we'll be doing here in a bit where we actually look at the month of May and recap what we just experienced from a higher level, right? We're going to be looking at a kind of continental North American viewpoint. But before we do, let's take a look back. Let's see what the historical data tells us is there for Sporadic E activity, basically since 2017, for those logs submitted to FM List from North American DXers, and see if that will help provide any context for us when we do start looking at the current year data. May is very much typically, and you can follow along with us if you'd like at fmdxdata.com. And when you're there at fmdxdata.com, you might want to pause here and pull up the site, and that way you can follow along. Here's I'm going to tell you where to go to follow along and watch this on screen with me. Once you're there, click on Temporal Trends on the left-hand data module menu, and we're going to go for the monthly almanac. Okay. And then below that, you'll see choices for each month. So just click on May. And so if you want to follow along on screen with us here, that's the click path to go. So fmdxdata.com, click on temporal trends, click on monthly almanac, and then click on the month of May. And when you're looking at the data, what you're going to notice here is that I've heat mapped these monthly almanacs so that you can see those periods of high activity stand out very, very clearly. So red is, in this case, kind of the cool color, but then we go up to a yellow, kind of that nuclear hot, right? Kind of the high radiation point there in the high spots. So when we look at the month of May, there's a lot of dim red here. And there's also a lot of black or gray, which indicates no activity. So there's a very large, especially if you kind of take it and cut it in half around the 15th, 16th of the month, and look everything before the 15th of the month, just see how much gray there is here. How many zeros we see for each day of the month for all these different years that you'll see. So the rows are the days, the years are the columns. A lot of zeros. And a lot of dim reds. We see one highlight in 2022 on May 7th. We saw a log total of about 296 logs. There was 139 on that same day last year in 2025. So that was interesting that they kind of June or May 7th kind of was the linchpin there for those two seasons to kind of get things kind of started. But then even with that, you'll see it kind of started to whittle its way down a little bit. Now, last year had a little bit more consistency to it because we had more active days in the month of May of 2025 than we usually do. Normally, if you'll scroll down towards the bottom of this table, you'll see a kind of a summary at the bottom. Underneath the total logs, there's a list of active days. There were 22 active days last year, 19 the year before that, 19 the year before that, 18 and 18 the 2 years before that. And so when you look from 2021 to 2025, 18 was kind of the bottom, and then it went up to 19 and then 22 last year. Now, before 2021, it was way, way down. Like 9, 11, 5, 12. Like, it was way, way down. The overall average since 2017 is 14 days. But really, since 2021, where activity kind of got going again, or we had enough DXer input and data to really kind of make this kind of more substantial, it's been at 18, 19 days is kind of the overall average. Okay. Another thing to note here for the month of May is that the log totals typically are not very high. And I was kind of alluding to that here when we look at like those first 2 weeks with, a cap of about 296 there as the high point in the first 2 weeks of the month, first 15 days. Typically, you don't see a lot of activity. Now, there are 3 years in the data where we had log counts that were over 500 logs in the span of 1 day. Those 3 were 2025, on May 24th, we had 543 logs on that day. On May 30th of 2020, on 2020, we had 524 logs. Okay. The big one was 2023. May 31st, 2023, 1,651 logs. May 31st, I always kind of look at that as like, if you get a big number there, it's kind of like an early June, right? So it's late May, but it's really kind of an early June opening if you get a really big burst right there. So those are the only 3 days in the entire data set from the month of May where we had more than 500 logs, and they were spread out over those 3 years. We had 6 days with more than 100 logs. We did that twice, 2021 and 2022. Last year, 2025, we had 5 days with more than 100 logs, 4 of those in 2023, 3 of those in 2024. Okay, so I kind of break up the log count into those kind of buckets there. So it's 100 or more, 500 or more, and then 1,000 or more. Well, we've only had the one that's gone over 1,000 for the month of May, and that was 2023. And then we had a couple of 5s and then a handful of the 1s. So it's not one of those months that's going to produce a lot of activity. So I feel like a lot of people, when they look at the month of May, they're looking and they're excited. They're wanting to get the e-skip season going, but they forget that May is really hit or miss. You might luck out and get something, and most people do get something in the month of May. Now, our friends out west, the West Coast, Pacific Northwest, and our friends up further north, like the upper Midwest, New England, up that way, they get a little less because the mechanisms that create these ionization patches in the E layer typically are a little more southern in the month of May. That's why you see so many southern paths. That's why when we look at the data, logs of stations down in the Caribbean, Central America, even maybe some double hop into South America, are a little more prevalent in the month of May than they are most of the rest of the season. So it's a little more southernly focused in May than it is maybe for, again, the folks out west, the folks up in the north, far north, like Pacific Northwest, upper Midwest, New England, like those farther northern latitudes. They make up for it in June and then again in July. In July, everybody gets in the action. June's a little bit more north, a little less south. July is everybody, but it's just a little bit less activity. But May has definitely got a little more peak down south because, again, those mechanisms that are creating these openings are a little more focused on those southern latitudes closer to the equator. So when we look at the data here, the overall story that we look at historically is that it takes a bit of time for things to get going. It takes a little bit of time for openings to start cranking up. And then when we look at the higher output days, they're almost exclusively confined to the last week of the month. You have that 1 year last year where we had a bigger 500 plus log opening on the 24th. That's right in that window. I mean, that's snuck in right there that last week. It's like that's the furthest back it could go and still be considered the last week of the month, right? Because that's exactly 7 days from the end of the month. So it's very, very focused on kind of building towards a peak the last week of May. Everything up before that is kind of a little bit of a hit or miss here, hit or miss there. Maybe a couple DXers over here get something. Maybe a couple DXers over there get something. It's enough to kind of get your appetite wet and to kind of start the process of kind of getting into e-skip mode. But it's not enough to really say, okay, I've had myself an opening here. I've got some recordings to review and really dive into this now. The last week of the month is where that usually starts to kind of happen in some capacity, where you start seeing those 200-300 log events, maybe a 500 here or there, or the 1 year we had the 1600 log event. That's where that kind of starts, okay? You can also tell that from an MUF standpoint. If you click on our modules on the left-hand side, if you look at frequency and MUF, there is kind of the same almanac here for each month, and we have May on here as well. You'll see the months that are in this one, the months are in red, are the big months, right? The big ones. Those are the high MUF ones. The lighter colors are lower MUF here. So when you look at it, 2022 was kind of a bigger year. You had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 days of MUF of 107.1 or higher, with quite a few of those being right at 107.9. And it's kind of sporadic for the other years. It's been, probably about somewhere in the neighborhood of about 5 or 6 days of that. And really what that's telling you, to get that MUF up to 107.9 or 107 and higher, you have to have a denser cloud, okay? And there's just not a lot of density to these clouds in May. And the reason for that is, when we look at what is needed to refract an FM signal, think about it, the higher you go in frequency, the smaller the wavelength is, right? So as we get up into the FM frequencies, and that's 20 megahertz worth of span that we're talking there, even from the low end to the high end, you're talking a 20 megahertz difference. Well, that's a pretty big difference in wavelength there. So in order to have those ionization layers be dense enough and thick enough to refract an FM signal all the way up at 107.9 megahertz, it needs to be a bit more dense than it would be for, say, 50 megahertz, right? Or 34 megahertz, or 70 megahertz, or whatever it might be in those kind of low band VHF areas, or even 88 megahertz. So to get that refraction to come through and bend that signal back down to Earth, it takes a denser cloud. It takes a denser patch of ionization to do that. So that's the month of May. Historically speaking, it's slow to get going. It's not a high producer. If you look at go back to our temporal trends heat map, and for the month of May, you're looking at log totals somewhere on the average of about 14 to 1800-ish, somewhere in that neighborhood. On a typical year, 1,400 logs to 1,800 logs. There was the 1 year in 2023 where we hit 2,493 because of May 31st. So it was 1,600 logs on that one day. Well, you take that one day out of the equation, and you were sitting at like 800 logs. So 2023 was a terrible month of May until we got to the 31st. And then it blew up and became our biggest one of the year. So that's one of those examples of, like, you can have a year where it's just not really getting going, and then it explodes at one point, and then the season's kind of kickstarted, right? Because 2023 was a decent year. We had some pretty good activity that year. It wasn't the best, but it was pretty good. It was a pretty good year. Then you look at a year like 2021. That was a little more spread out, 1,768 logs, but you had 6 days of 100 logs or more. 2023 only had 4. Now, there were no 500 log days, but it was just 1,700 logs kind of done the hard way, right? Spread out over 18 days, a course of 18 days, 1,700 logs. So it was just more consistent. And I think my theory here is, when you talk to DXers and you get their opinion about what's your thoughts on the season, was it a good year or not, there's two things that happen. One, it's going to be completely colored by just their observation from their location, because that's all they have. which is why I started doing CDAP in the first place, because I was looking at my data, and then I was looking at like Pat Dyer's data from San Antonio, his multi-decade review. But I was like, well, that's just San Antonio. You're in the middle of the country. So you're going to get stuff out west, you're going to get stuff down in Mexico, you're going to get stuff out east, you're going to get stuff north of you, all over. So you're going to have more opportunities for e-skip because you're kind of in that middle area there, right? Someone on the East Coast, it's got to be all to your west or south for the most part, right? So you've got a much more limited directions that are capable for you to be able to get some good e-skip in many cases. So the people in the center should get some good e-skip. And be more prone to different directions and things like that. So that kind of colors that data from Pat. So I found myself asking, so is this year good for Pat because it was a good year, or because the paths for San Antonio that year were good? And I started asking myself the same thing for me. I was like, was this a good year for me because the paths were good for Mandeville, or was it just a good year for everybody? So we started wanting to look at this more macro level, and that's what CDAP really was about. So when you talk to DXers, so obviously the first things first is their personal experience on the season from their location is going to color that more than anything else. So if you talk to someone from out west in the month of May was not kind to them, right? They're going to say it was pretty rough. We didn't have anything. I mean, I normally get like a couple openings at least. I didn't get anything, right? That's valid. That's valid. But when we talk about the season as a whole for North America, we have to zoom out a bit, and we have to get that context of what was really going on in the ionosphere as a whole for the continent, for all of North America. The second thing that you'll find here is that I really believe that when people talk about quality of season, it's not just about log output, because you can have a really high log output season, but just keep getting the same paths over and over, the same stations over and over. Did you view that as a quality season? Probably not. I think a lot of DXers, they want consistency. They want activity more often than not, especially as you get into the peak June, July. They want most days to have some activity out there. And now be able to, since we can see like the maps and stuff on FM List and WLogger, we want to see the activity that somebody's getting something. And we also want diversity of where these clouds are located. I don't want to keep getting Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ontario, New York with every opening. Maybe DC, Maryland, New Jersey. Like, I don't want to get that every single opening. Where's my openings to Arizona? Where's my openings to like deep into Colorado? Where's my openings up into Nebraska or Wyoming? Right? Those are the things where I'm like, where's my opening to Utah that I have still not gotten here in Mandeville? When we look at the quality of the season, I think those are some of the things that go into it. It's how consistent was it at producing activity, and how diverse was it at giving me different paths rather than just the same stuff over and over and over. So when we talk about quality, we're talking about just how productive was it? How many days were active? How many DXers got in on the action? Was the footprint diverse? How many logs are we talking? What was the log per DXer output? We're talking about all these different factors to try to use all of that to give us a kind of quality index of the season or the month or whatever it is we're looking at. So it's a little bit of a different viewpoint than what you're going to hear like Nick or Bryce talking about on the VHF DX podcast when they're giving their thoughts on what May sounded like to them as far as DX goes, or a DXer out west, or a DXer down in Texas, or wherever it might be. It's just going to be a different viewpoint. So I'm here to help provide the context on a larger, zoomed out scale. Obviously, you know what you did or didn't get. So at the end of the day, that's what matters. Okay? Because even me personally, I have my personal thought on what May was like and what June has been so far. And then I'm looking at the data and I'm like, I'm having a hard time reconciling some of this with my own brain. All right. Before we get to our current year, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to look at May 2026. What's the story, Morning Glory? What's the data telling us? How did the month break down? Is it good? Is it bad? Is that even something we can even tell yet? How did it all shake out? So we'll dive into those numbers Don't go anywhere, my friends. We'll be right back after this.
From the Static is made possible by listeners just like you. If you love tracking the bands and sharing the thrill of the chase, consider joining the crew in Studio C on Patreon. Your support is what keeps the dials spinning and the content coming. As a thank you, our patrons get exclusive perks, including early access to every single podcast episode, a full week of early access to all DX Central YouTube videos, exclusive patron-only live streams, and the first look at upcoming challenges and contests. Help us keep the static alive. Become a member today at patreon.com/DXCentral. That's patreon.com/DXCentral.
The summer heat is officially here, and that means the dials are catching fire. The third annual DX Central Summer of DX Challenge is underway right now. This year, we've turned up the temperature. For the first time ever, we've added NOAA weather radio to the lineup. Get ready to hunt down those elusive low-power weather radio stations via Tropo, Meteor Scatter, or major Sporadic E openings. We've completely overhauled the medium wave and FM interfaces with a brand new log entry process featuring full bulk import options to save you time. And the hunt goes deeper than ever. Alongside our classic grid square chase, we've added a brand new county chase and targeted bounty hunts to push your gear to the limit. Are you ready to claim your spot on the leaderboard? Head to summerofdx.com and log your catches today.
Summer of DX.
Hey DXers, do you need a break from the same old static? Well, then you need to tune in to DX Radio, where we're spinning the best custom DX themed music on the web.
What are you doing?
What's up?
Please, step away from the microphone.
I mean, I'm just cutting the DX Radio promo.
You hired me to be the station voice. So why are you doing the station voice?
Well, I mean, to be fair, DX Radio is a DX Central venture. It's my project. Plus, do I need to remind you, I actually do have some radio experience. I was on air, I did sports, I was a news director.
Ah, yes. Who can forget your tenure in the massive market of the mountains of North Carolina? We're all still deeply moved by the legacy of Uncle Lloyd's Bluegrass Hoedown Jamboree. Not to mention those years doing college radio.
Okay, first of all, it wasn't so much a hoedown as it was a jamboree. And second, I know my way around a promo read.
Lloyd, you pay me to read the promos. Let me do the job you hired me to do. I don't walk into your office and interfere with your spreadsheets or fuddle about with the antenna feed lines. If you feel the need to manage someone, maybe go stop Gary from trying to use the vibration of the studio monitors to mix the ingredients in his morning bowl of oatmeal.
I'm just trying to tell them about the website. Wait, did he actually do that?
But you are rushing it. It lacks mystery. How do you expect to properly prepare them for the After Dark playlist if you sound like you're selling them aluminum siding or trying to convince them to attend Rock and Glow Bowling at the Bowlerama?
You don't need to prepare them for anything, Peter. It's just the nighttime rotation.
It is unbridled mayhem, Lloyd. It is the audio equivalent of a fever dream. You cannot just tell them about the After Dark rotation. You have to make them feel the danger.
You just want mic time, don't you?
I am simply trying to justify my paycheck before the interns burn this building to the ground.
All right, fine. The floor is yours. Just make sure you actually read and hit the URL this time. This is probably dxradio.com.
Don't get me started on that proverbial mouthful of a URL. Did they make you pay by the letter for that one? DX Radio, custom DX themed music for the discerning listener during the day. An absolute, unapologetic Hunter S. Thompson novel after the sun goes down. Experience the mayhem. Tune in now at thisisprobablydxradio.com. for more of the From the Static podcast from DX Central and your host, Lloyd Van Horn.
We are talking Sporadic E for the month of May here on the From the Static podcast. And we've done our look back, our historical look back at years past. Now it's time to get to the present, or the recent present. Well, it did start out very sluggish. In fact, from May 3rd through May 7th, we had nothing. We had one log reported on May 2nd. May 8th, we had one log reported. We didn't get our first multi-log event until May 9th. So you're talking about 8 days of nothing. Which, when you think about it, makes sense. Again, because it's May. But you expect to see something in there. You expect to see some sort of life in those first 8 days. And when we look at the historical data, most years have some life in them in those first 8 days. And I'm not talking like 600 logs, but May 7th, 2 years had over 100 logs. 1 year was almost 300. May 8th in 2022 had 140. Now, 2022 didn't have anything until its first multi-log event was on the 6th. The first multi-log event last year was on the 3rd. The first multi-log event in 2024 was on the 2nd of May, right? So it varies by year, but I just feel like maybe that first week of the month kind of set the tone for what May was going to look like, especially the finish that we'll get to in a bit. So May 9th was our first multi-log event. 2 DXers were in on that one. 33 total logs for 17 logs per DXer-ish, right? Then we get to the next day, the May 10th. And now we're starting to see what I would expect to see, which is not a huge opening. There were 13 DXers that got in on it, which is pretty good for May, especially early May. 126 total logs. And then the following day was 197 total logs. And here's the crazy part about that. So I mentioned that we didn't get anything from the 2nd through the 8th. But the first 12 days of this year, in the month of May, were the highest output we had of any other year. I'm pretty sure for the first 12 days, our output in this year was, it wasn't the highest. It was right behind 2022. It was the highest out of every year except for 2022. 197, 126, and 33 compared to 2022 in those two ones. Compared to 2022, which had a 42, had a 36, a 296, a 140, a 12, and a 23. So that had a higher count those first 12 days in 2022, but this was right behind it for the most part. But it was, such a huge amount of nothing going on there for a big chunk of that. So it was really over those 3 days that we got any activity at all. Then it hit that little wall again. The 13th, 14th, 3 days between those 2 days, or 3 logs between those 2 days. Then we get to the 16th, we're starting to ramp up again. And this is something that I noticed last year was happening. Now, this doesn't happen every year. When I look at historical data, usually when you have like a big event, it happens one of two ways. Either there's nothing and it just shows up, like 2023 and May 31st did. It just shows up. Or you get this ramp up where it's like, okay, we have 30 logs, we have 70 logs, now we have this higher count. And that might be like, the next day might be the big one, or it might be a little bit bigger, and then we get to a bigger one. And then typically, when you have a ramp up, you get the big event, and then it falls off a cliff. And like the next day is just nothing, or very, very small. Now, the years where you would see nothing, and then you have a big day, that had more of a ramp down in a lot of cases. Okay? And I saw that happening last year. as well. I saw this ramp up to a big event or a big event and then a ramp down. This year so far, it seems like it's a ramp up. I haven't seen a ramp down yet necessarily. Well, maybe a little bit. We'll look at that here in a second. So we had the 16th, 35 logs, 4 DXers, 8 DXers on the 17th with 73 logs. Okay. And then we get to the 18th, and now we have our first big event. 19 DXers, 526 logs. Now, remember what I said about historical performance of the month of May, that we've only had 3 days in our data set across all the years, and they're spread out over 3 different years, with 500 or more logs. Well, here is one now on May 18th of 2026. We have a 526 log day on that day. That number is probably going to go up because I still have some logs to go through on that day. Again, 19 DXers, a 28 log per DXer count. Then we get to May 19th. 802 logs, 34 DXers, 24 logs per DXer on average. So that's unprecedented, actually, to have 2 days of nearly roughly 1,300 logs, nearly 1,400 logs over the span of 2 days in the month of May. Outside of that one May 31st of 2023, when we saw 1,600 logs for the entire day, a 2-day span of that high of a number is something we've never seen in our data set. It doesn't exist in our data set. So there's your ramp up, right? 35, 73, 526, 802. And again, that number will go up because I know personally, I have logs yet still to be reviewed for that one. Then we get to the 20th, and now we're talking about, we've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 20th is now the 5th day in a row of activity. So we're looking good after a pretty sluggish start. Now we've strung together 5 days in a row of activity, and it's 31 logs, 7 DXers. So a 4 log per DXer count. Now that's not a huge number, but it's something. Right? It's something that's there, and people are getting some activity. And again, it's that consistency. It's the month is starting to consistently string together some events that someone is getting some DX off of, with a couple of bigger things kind of thrown in. Then we get to the 21st. And May 21st, 2026, we had an event where we have 1,305 logs and counting, by the way. I'm going through that IQ recording right now. 1,305 logs and counting on May 21st, 2026. 37 DXers reporting logs on that day. 35 logs per DXer. Unprecedented. We just had almost 1,400 logs on the 18th and 19th. There's a little lull right there on the 20th, and then explosion of activity on the 21st. Our first big opening of the year was on May 21st. Now, we've had some bigger openings, those 500 and 1,600 log days that we had later in the month of May. They were all in that last week, though. They were all in that last week of the month. We don't have anything before the 24th of May that has ever produced the kind of activity that we saw this year on May 18th, 19th, and 21st of May. Those have not been, those have no equal in the month of May in our data set. So there's that ramp up. And with the exception of that little dip there on the 20th, which was almost like a, when I was in track, our coach used to have us do this hitch kick. When I ran track, you wouldn't tell looking at me now, but when I used to run track in high school, our coach would have us do a hitch kick as we came around the corner, right? The big curve, and you're about to head into the straightaway. You would do a hitch kick right as you got to that apex of the curve onto the straightaway. And that hitch kick, you just kind of kicked your foot up real high, your right foot real high, and then you would throw it down real hard. And that was supposed to propel you down the straightaway. that's what we basically just had. May 20th was the hitch. May 21st was the kick. So it was ramp up, hitch kick, bam. There we go. May 22nd, a little residual energy still in the ionosphere. 80 logs. 10 DXers on that one. 8 logs per DXer. I had a little opening to Colorado that day, which was nice. I don't get that Western stuff very often. It's always Pennsylvania, Ontario, Michigan. When you have almost as many logs in the state of Michigan as you do Louisiana, and you live in Louisiana, that's a common path. Right? Then we hit the 23rd, no logs. 24th, 6 logs. 1 DXer. 25th, no logs. So this can happen a lot of times, especially when you have a larger event like that. Over the last couple of years at least, I've noticed that after a larger event, the ionosphere kind of needs a little time to kind of reset. So you're going to get some days of lower activity. You're going to get maybe some days of no activity, but you're definitely going to probably get some days of lower activity. The goose egg days like that, those are more common in like May. Anyway, regardless, but you know, last couple of years we've had some bigger events that took place, and then there was like a no activity or low activity day the next day or the next couple of days. So we had that here. We had the 24th, 23rd, nothing, 24th, 6, 25th, nothing, 26 on the 26th, we had 14 logs. So a total of 20 logs over the span of 1, 2, 3, 4 days after we just had close to 3,000 logs over the span of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days. Right? So there's a pattern change here. Then we hit to the 27th. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier when we had that big gap at the beginning of the month from May 3rd through May 7th, where we had nothing on any of those days. 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, no activity. We had no activity on May 27th, 28th, or 29th across the board. Now, what made that even more damaging, I think, to May's perception was it was the last week of the month. That's when you're supposed to have this stuff, the big stuff. That's when you're supposed to be bringing your juice and ramping up. Now, I'm not saying every day has to be 500 logs, but I am saying you would have to have a couple hundreds in there, maybe 500 scattered around. So the way that May ended really, I think, kind of soured some people on the month. It was going really, really good between the 18th and 21st, 22nd even, and then it just stopped. It just stopped. Even May 30th, we did have some activity. We got going again, the 26th. But this is that thing that I was talking about where sometimes you'll have a big event that needs a couple of days to reset. Well, this one was almost 10 days. 9-10 days to reset. It's a stretch. I felt that as well because I want to say it was almost 2 full weeks between my e-skip openings that I had here in Mandeville, which is not common. That's not common. You know, we usually have one every couple of days at least, or once a week. So to go that long without anything was pretty rare. We did have a decent day on the 31st, and this is what started to kind of restore my hope in the season. Because, you know, I was thinking, well, did we just kind of have this big burst of activity and now it's going to be shut down? But we had a 210 log event with 23 DXers reporting on the 31st of May, 9 logs per DXer. So that's a decent day. That's a decent day. Those are the kind of days you want to see a couple of those days the last week of the month, not goose eggs, right? So all told, when you take it all out, 3,469 total logs. Even if we take out our top day at 1,305 logs on May 21st and counting, we would still be more than 2,100 logs, which would still be just behind. Now, that would put us behind 2023 for the highest output year, but it'd still be above every other year, even if we didn't have the 21st. Just those other 2 days, the 18th, the 19th, a bigger day on the 22nd, 210 on the 31st, and those other 200-plus days. That kind of set the tone for that entire month. We had 6 days with 100 or more logs. The 10th, the 11th, the 18th, 19th, 21st, and the 31st. So 6 days with 100 or more logs. We had 3 days with 500 or more logs in the month of May 2026. We doubled our 500 log day count for the month of May in our data set in 1 year. We doubled it. So when I talk about, my perception of the month of May, that opening on the 21st and the one we had on the 19th, those were pretty good days. For me personally, those were pretty good days. But the rest of the month can kick rocks because I just didn't get hardly anything at all. I think one day in there I got 3 logs from Colorado Springs. I think that was like the 11th, I think. The rest of the month I got nothing. I just got nothing. I had the 18th, maybe I think there was a little bit there, the 19th, the 21st, and then those handful of logs on the 22nd, and that was it. And I was one of the lucky ones. I'm not dismissing that notion, by the way. I was one of the lucky ones to actually get something. Our friends out west in California, they got skunked. They got nothing. But then you look at it on the macro level, and this is why we do this. There were 18 active days, which is right there in the average for the last 5 years or so, 5-6 years. 18 active days, 3,469 total logs, 65 DXers, 65 unique DXers getting in on the action. Again, that's one behind 2025. So lest anybody comes over and says that the reason we had such a high count was because we have so many new DXers logging the FM list. We had less this year than we did last year, and we more than doubled our log total from last year with one less DXer. So that alone is not going to explain the surge in activity. 53 logs per DXer was our highest we've ever had in the month of May. MUF, we had, let's see, what was it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days of 107.9 or higher. So not quite to what we saw in like 2010 or 2021 rather, when we had 10 days. 6 days is a little behind that, obviously, but it's still pretty good. It's decent. There was some decent density to the clouds in there to give us some good openings for most people. So what does the story tell us for the month of May? It tells me that it was a typical May in that it was very sluggish. It was atypical in that we had such long stretches of no activity. Now, the earlier stretch there in the early part of the month is not atypical for the first 2 weeks, but that one at the end of the month was. We just don't typically see that many days of just nothing going on the last week of the month. That's not typical. By the time we get to that last week of the month, things are starting to ramp up and gear up with more consistency. It's still not huge log counts, but there's more consistency there. And it just didn't happen this year. So my walk away from the month of May, when I got to June 1st and I was looking back at the data, was, oh boy, are we going to get back on track here? Because when we were in that week, the 18th to the 21st or so, I was over here thinking, are we on tap for a historical year? Because this is crazy. This is crazy, crazy. I mean, are we heading for something like mega? And then we got to that last week of the month and I was like, well, clearly not. Because that's when you would expect something to happen, and it just didn't. So from a macro level, it was a historic month of May for the amount of explosiveness that we had. But I think we can all agree the quality of the month as a whole wasn't super great, but the output was for the folks who got activity when there was activity. It was like a little mini June opening to an extent. It was like a definite preparation for the month of June. But the rest of the month, not so much. So we've done our look back. Now let's do a little bit of a look forward. What does the current year data, including the first week of June, tell us about maybe what we can expect for this year, the rest of the Sporadic E season on 2026? We're going to get into that topic right after this quick break.
From the Static is made possible by listeners just like you. If you love tracking the bands and sharing the thrill of the chase, consider joining the crew in Studio C on Patreon. Your support is what keeps the dials spinning and the content coming. As a thank you, our patrons get exclusive perks, including early access to every single podcast episode, a full week of early access to all DX Central YouTube videos, exclusive patron-only live streams, and the first look at upcoming challenges and contests. Help us keep the Static alive. Become a member today at patreon.com/DXCentral. That's patreon.com/DXCentral.
Ever wonder what the bands sound like down on the Gulf Coast? You don't have to wonder anymore. Head over to livedxing.com and spin the dials right from our North Shore studios. For AM, shortwave and ham radio enthusiasts, we have a dedicated lineup of Kiwi SDRs ready to pull in weak signals. If you're an FM DXer, dive into our suite of 5 high-performance FM web servers, each paired with a top-tier antenna built specifically to catch legendary Gulf Tropo openings, and hopefully some Sporadic E. Plus, our VHF and tracking setups let you monitor local air traffic from MSY, pull in NOAA weather radio, and decode live APRS, ADSB, and marine AIS data right on the map. If you want to explore further, we've got links to global receiver directories to take your DXing worldwide. Experience the airwaves from our neck of the woods. For the DXer or radio enthusiast who wants to hear it all, visit livedxing.com today.
The summer heat is officially here, and that means the dials are catching fire. The third annual DX Central Summer of DX Challenge is underway right now. This year, we've turned up the temperature. For the first time ever, we've added NOAA weather radio to the lineup. Get ready to hunt down those elusive, low-power weather radio stations via Tropo, Meteor Scatter, or major Sporadic E openings. We've completely overhauled the medium wave and FM interfaces with a brand new log entry process featuring full bulk import options to save you time. And the hunt goes deeper than ever. Alongside our classic grid square chase, we've added a brand new county chase and targeted bounty hunts to push your gear to the limit. Are you ready to claim your spot on the leaderboard? Head to summerofdx.com and log your catches today.
Summer of DX 47.
The on-air light is back on in Studio A. That means it's time for our final segment of the From the Static podcast from DX Central with your host, Lloyd Van Horn.
And it is our final segment here of the From the Static podcast here from DX Central. And we are talking Sporadic E. This is going to be a series we'll be doing this summer. And for this edition, we are looking at the month of May specifically because we've wrapped that up now. And if you're just joining us, or if you were kind of skipping around, we've looked at the historical data from years past, 2017 and before, to see what the historical data tells us and gives us as far as the context for the month of May. And then we looked at this year, the month of May, 2026, to kind of see how we fit within that context. Now, it's time to put on our thinking caps and try to evaluate what may be ahead and what may be in store for the rest of the season. A dangerous prospect, to be sure. The first week of June is very telling in a lot of seasons. It's not always. Like 2021, the first week of June told us nothing about what was coming in the month of July. Nothing could have told us. That was, by the way, even as good as last year was, with our highest log output ever, in July 4th, with 4,000 logs in one day, 4,000 plus, being our highest single log day ever, it still couldn't touch our best single month in our data set, which was July of 2021. That still is the one that we kind of look at in recent years, at least in recent modern SDR era times. July of 2021 is that month that we kind of look at as like, this is what you're kind of looking for. You're looking for a month like this. And even it had so much going for it, and then it just kind of faded. And then you had a couple little spurts here and there later on, but it kind of faded out, which is what you would think anyway. In July's, the end of the month kind of approaches. But it wasn't consistent, where there was like crazy amounts of activity every day. But no other month has been able to touch it. So even last year's amazingly high output, that's the one. But nothing that came before that in 2021 would have told you that was coming. So I say that when I say, and I'm looking at the month of June so far, the first week of June, the first 5 days of June, and I'm trying to kind of prognosticate what I think might be coming as we head into the rest of the season based on that first week. Just know nothing is going to, if we have like a burst in June or July, or like last year we had that burst in August, nothing that happened could have told me that was coming. Right? So keep that in mind. You can have a slam on the brakes, or you can have the season floor it at any given time. And you're like, I wasn't ready for that. But what are we looking at from a consistency standpoint? First 5 days of June. Well, we started off June 1st with 134 logs. So, and again, these are very preliminary numbers because there's a whole lot of people still looking at recordings right now. I think every day I go back in and look at the updated numbers. I think I add another 50 logs or so every day to some of these. So it's definitely still in flux. 134 logs on June 1st, 15 DXers. So that was right on the heels. The day before was 210. So now we had 2 sustained days of 100 or more logs, one in May 31st, one June 1st. So now we're trending back in a positive direction. Now that's starting to look more like what I would expect to see. June 2nd, 740 logs, 38 DXers. Getting in on that one for a 19 log per DXer average. June 3rd, 1,053 logs. 39 DXers, 27 log per DXer average. And then we get to June 4th. 694 logs, 27 DXers, 26 per DXer average. And today, June 5th, still going right now. Let me see, is there any activity going on right now? I don't think so. No, nothing right now. We had some earlier today. 338 logs last time I checked. We're probably closer to 350 by now. For June 5th. So when you add all that up, we're just under 3,000 logs for the month of June so far, which already, just as a historical perspective, that's already more than all of 2024, June of 2024. In just the first 5 days, we already have more than the entire month of June did in 2024. Let's see, 3,000 logs, or it was about 2,900. We had 4,500 logs, 4,600 logs in the month of June in 2021. So June of 2021 was kind of meh. We didn't have any logs that year that went over 1,000 logs in the month of June. No days. We did in 2022. We had a couple. But 2022, June was not that great. And May was all right. It was okay. It was pretty good, I guess. I think it was 1,700 logs that month. Yeah, so it was pretty good. And then we get to June, it was kind of eh. And then July exploded with more than 10,000 logs for the month. So that's what I'm saying. Take what I'm saying here about the first 5 days of June with a grain of salt, because it's not really telling you anything. But if we're looking from a historical context, I can tell you that last year we had a 13 log. We didn't have anything on June 1st. And then we had a 13 log event day on the 2nd, 1,637 on the 3rd, 452 and 113 to round out those first 5 days. 2024 never crossed 100. It barely crossed 50, if I'm going to be honest. Only one day went above 50 logs those first 5 days. 2023 never crossed 300 in those first 5 days. 2022, we had one 100 log day and one 1,200 log day, and the rest were all under 100. 2021, we had one day that crossed 100. The rest were all less than 50. Actually, most of them were under 30. So the first 5 days, historically, decent, but not super great. But you expect to see like one decent size opening in the month of the first week of June. And here we are with 134, 740, 1053, 694 to start the month. That is unprecedented in our data. There is nothing in any of the previous years that even comes close to that for the first 5 days. Now, it, again, could slam on the brakes tomorrow and we not get anything until the end of the month or something, right? We could be destined for absolutely nothing. I don't think it's going to happen, but we could be destined for nothing. Or we could have a couple of days here, especially because we just had a big solar storm here. 3 CMEs just hit us, which I'll talk about that in a second. We could see a little bit of a rebound and reload time for the ionosphere. Might need a little bit of time to kind of get its bearings again, restock the supply of meteor dust, and go from there. Now, this week of June, this first week of June, there is I think it's the Artids meteor shower. It's a daytime meteor shower that peaks this week. Now, it does that every year, and it hasn't produced a lot every year. We've had those couple of years where it did produce something good one day, but it's never produced like it's doing right now. Again, we're talking 3,000 logs over the span of 5 days. That's a lot. That's a lot. That's almost a 400 log per day average. Really, really close. And actually, when all the logs are submitted and kind of the data is put in, we'll probably be around 3,200 logs, I would imagine, for those 5 days, which would put us around a 400 log per day average. That's crazy. That's crazy. To average 400 logs a day for your first 5 days of the month, that's crazy. That's not going to continue. You're not going to see that every day. That's going to have to stop. So I don't want people to, if you're listening to this podcast, there's going to be a period of a lull in activity coming up. It could be starting like the next day or two. It could be the next week. Who knows? But we're going to get a lull in activity here. That kind of output is not sustainable every single day for the entire month. If it does, you can pretty much kiss July right out the water. I don't think we would see 2 months of that. I mean, anything could happen, but I highly doubt you would see 2 months in a row of that kind of sustained activity. You're not going to see 1 month. Do I think we're heading for a big month? Yeah, I do. I think we're heading for a big month. I think we have probably 1, maybe 2 more days in the month of June ahead of us that'll pass 1,000 logs. How far above 1,000, I don't know, but I think we still have another 1 to 2 more days ahead of us that will peak over 1,000, or maybe okay, I'll give it a range, 800 to 1,200 logs for the day. I think we got 1 or 2 more of those in us for the month of June. I see probably a good number of 1 to 300 log days on our horizon as well. Those days that I feel like you need to have for people to feel good about the month. That consistency thing we talked about, I feel like you need a good number of those 1 to 300 log days for people to look at the month and feel like, you know what, it was a good month. I didn't get in on all the action, but people were getting in on the action, and I could see that on the maps. I got enough to feel okay. It was a good month. So when we do our mid-season poll this year, I think there's a good chance that most people are going to feel pretty good about this season. I feel like most people will, especially because these first 5 days of June, the geography has spread. The West Coast went from a handful of like less than 40 logs in the month of May. By the end of the month of May, the West Coast, California, Nevada, that way, had maybe 40 logs. Now they're 600 and counting. And that's just the first 5 days of June. Big boost to the West Coast DXers. So that's the kind of stuff you have to have. You have to have more of that. You have to have more people getting in on the action. Like now I'm looking at the Pacific Northwest. As those conditions, those mechanisms that create sporadic E start to shift northward, I expect to see more for the Pacific Northwest folks, the Upper Midwest, New England, those folks, the Larry out there in Newfoundland. All of y'all should start seeing a lot more activity. I hope, if this progresses the way that it should. That's when I'll know. If that happens and they start getting some of these same kind of openings that the rest of us have been getting, then I feel like the season's going to be perceived very, very well. But we'll have to wait and see. We'll just have to wait and see. We just had 3 CMEs hit us, kind of merged together into one. Now, the prevailing logic, people think that solar storms have an impact on E's. Well, I'll tell you this. In 2024, solar storms killed E. We would have a solar storm where you had like visible aurora way south and then have nothing for days. But that was 2024. Last year, it felt like solar storms enhanced the E's. And we ended up with our biggest productive year in our data set. So what will this year's solar storms do? I don't know. But I do know that we are now on the downswing from solar maximum. Why is that important? There's not a consensus on this, so I'm telling you the overall here, okay? Just the overall, overarching kind of thought. But there is some data to support. It's not 100% here, but there is some data to support the notion that on the downside, the ramp down from a solar maximum, E activity increases. When I analyzed Pat Dyer's data, that was one of the things that I saw. And I've talked to several people who have high levels of knowledge in sporadic E. I've watched a bunch of YouTube videos on this from PAMSci and some of these others, and they've kind of echoed similar sentiments. And I've read a couple of research papers on this. There's literature out there, there's research that's been done that points to there being a possible correlation between higher activity seasons and those ramp down years immediately after a solar maximum peak. And we had a double peak. We had a 2-peak solar maximum cycle 25. With 2024 and 2025 both having kind of little peaks. So I would expect, if that is the case, I would expect this to be a good year. If this explosiveness that we're seeing is not going to rid our ionosphere of all of its material and particulate that it can use to ionize little patches, right? That's the thing I'm most afraid of, I guess, is if we have these bigger days like this, like last year, you had some big days and then you had some stretches of nada. So are we going to see that this year where you have some explosive days and it kind of uses up the material and then you have to restock the shelves, so to speak, and then you have some more explosive days and then you have some more downtime? Or are we going to see some explosive days, but there's still enough material left over for some decent days in between? And I feel like the years that we've looked at in the past, like pre-2017, when we had like the early 2000s, late 90s, when we had those really, really big years, early 90s, those really, really big years of E-Skip that we still talk about to this day. I feel like that's what we had. We had some really big days, and then there was still enough going on that even in between the really big days, there were still some good days of activity in there. It wasn't as big as the big days, but it was still really, really good. That's what I want for 2026 and next year too. That's what I want to see. And I feel like if what I'm seeing so far is the case, maybe we're heading towards that. It's really going to be telling, as I'm recording this here on June 5th, it's going to be really telling what we get on June 6th, 7th, and 8th. The next 3 days are going to tell me a lot about this season. We'll call it the next 3 to 5 days. The next 3 to 5 days are going to tell me a lot about what to expect this season. If the ionosphere is quick to recover, we could be heading for something historic. If it's not quick to recover and we have kind of a prolonged stretch of 3 to 4 to 5 days of no or low activity, then it's going to be one of those years like last year where people are like, I didn't get anything, or I had a great year. It's going to be hit or miss. So it just comes down to how quickly can the ionosphere recover from these last 5 days we've had producing the kind of events that we've had. Are we going to see some sustained activity on the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th? Or are we going to see a lull and a slow ramp back up again? Because that's what we've had the last couple of years, right? Well, at least last year. So very, very interested to see what happens in the next 5 days, 3 to 5 days. That's going to tell us a lot. So when we do reconvene after the month of June, we'll send out our mid-season poll around that time. We'll do another one of these to talk about the month of June. And I hope that we'll be reconvening in a positive light, sitting here saying, wasn't that a good month? Wasn't that awesome? Hopefully you found this to be enjoyable. It's a little more long form, a little longer than I wanted it to be, but it's fun to talk about. It's fun to dive into the numbers and kind of talk about. So hopefully you found this interesting and informative and helpful or entertaining or whatever. Appreciate you all joining us here on the podcast. We'll have more of these episodes coming up. Be sure, if you have not yet subscribed or followed or liked or whatever it is on your podcast venue that you use, make sure you do that so that as we do more episodes this summer and beyond, that you'll be notified. You'll be getting back to the live streams again in the fall. We'll have our audio-only version of those as well. And I have some more stuff I've been working on for a while, some more of the history of radio and some other things we'll be working on to get some more podcast episodes. So excited about that for you guys. But definitely wanting to see how this month plays out so we have a good conversation for next month. My friends, thank you so much for joining in here on the DX Central from a Static podcast. This is Lloyd Van Horn from the North Shore Studio saying 73, best of DX. Good luck.
You have been listening to From the Static, a podcast production of DX Central.
DX Central is your premier destination devoted to all things AM and FM DX.
Expand your DXing experience by subscribing to our YouTube channel at the handle @DX Central for comprehensive how-to videos, DX air checks, and much more.
And join the community every Friday night from September through May for our weekly live streams. You can find us at dxcentrallive.com.
Ready to test your skills? Head over to dxchallenges.com to participate in our regular contests and challenges built specifically for AM and FM DXers around the world.
Or, if you would like to experience the bands from the Gulf Coast, visit livedxing.com. We provide an assortment of online receivers that allow you to spin the dials exactly as if you are sitting right here in Mandeville at North Shore Studios.
Need a soundtrack for your next DXing session? Check out DX Radio at thisisprobablydxradio.com, featuring custom DX-themed music aimed squarely at the DXing community.
If your brand or business is interested in reaching a dedicated community of radio enthusiasts, sponsorship opportunities are available. Please reach out to us via email at sponsors@dxcentral.net.
The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of DX Central.
This podcast is a production of DX Central and is copyright 2026 by Lloyd Van Horn. All rights reserved. Any unauthorized rebroadcast, reproduction, or use of this audio without express written consent is strictly prohibited.
Thank you for listening. Keep the dial spinning 73 and best of DX.